Colorado Territory, 1889. The stage stop at Bent Grass was the kind of place that existed to be passed through and had organized itself entirely around this fact. A water trough, a rail, a low building with a counter inside where you could buy coffee and wait. The sign on the counter said the coffee was 15 cents and fresh, which was true about the 15 cents. Madeleine Ashford stepped down from the stage into the afternoon light with a traveling case in her right hand and 7 months of grief and 5 years of anger and one specific purpose driving all of it, and she looked like none of these things. She looked, to anyone who glanced at her, like a woman of 26 dressed for travel in a practical dark blue riding dress with a fitted jacket, hair done plainly, gloves, the old leather kind, working gloves, not decorative, and an expression of focused attention that did not invite conversation. The man waiting for her was leaning against the rail on the far side of the trough, and he straightened when he saw her come off the stage, and then he looked at her case and her gloves and her expression, and he straightened back down a little, because she was not what he had expected. His name was Levi Calder. He was 35, a trail guide who worked the Taungwin routes between the stage stops and the remote ranch properties that wagons couldn't reliably reach, and he had been hired by Edmund Vale's man in Bent Grass to escort a Miss Ashford to Vale Ranch for a wedding. He had expected. He was not entirely sure what he had expected. Something that required handling. He was looking at someone who had just spent 6 hours on a stage alone and looked no worse for it than if she'd been sitting in a comfortable parlor. He said, "Miss Ashford, I'm Levi Calder. I'll be taking you across to Vale Ranch." She said, "Before you do that, I need to know the route," he told her. She said, "Does it go through the county seat?" "No." "Then I need you to adjust it." He looked at her. "My contract is to take you to Vale Ranch. I need to stop at the county seat first. The contract doesn't include Mr. Calder." She had the precise voice of someone who has explained herself too many times to be patient about it. "I'm asking you to take me to the county seat before Vale Ranch. I will pay you separately for the additional time." He thought about it. She was the person he was being paid to escort. If she wanted to go somewhere first, that was technically her business. He also thought about the contract and about Edmund Vale's man who had given him the contract and about the way the contract had been worded, which he was now looking at differently. He said, "Why the county seat?" "Personal business," she said. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the equanimity of someone who has no intention of explaining herself further. He said, "We ride at dawn." She said, "We ride now." He looked at the sky. "We'll lose the light in 3 hours," he said. "Then we'll stop in 3 hours," she said. "But I'd rather be 3 hours closer to the county seat than standing in this station." He picked her case. She followed him to the horses. She rode well. This was the first useful piece of information he got about her, and it revised several assumptions at once. She sat a horse correctly and managed the pace without needing instruction, and when they hit the section of trail that went rough through the dry creek bed, she adjusted without drama. He rode ahead, which was the arrangement he intended. She rode behind. That lasted 45 minutes. Then the sky ahead changed color. Not sunset, wrong angle, wrong quality. The light was brown-orange and flat, and the horizon to the northwest had a particular blur to it that took him a moment to identify because he hadn't been in the Bent Grass corridor in 3 months, and he'd forgotten the dust shelf formation that happened over the old creek bed when the west wind came in. He was turning to say something about it when she spoke first. "If you go left into the dry creek bed," she said, "you'll put us directly under the dust shelf. We need to go up." He looked at the horizon. He looked at the creek bed to the left. He had been about to go left. He said, "What do you know about dust shelves?" "My father was a surveyor and rancher. I grew up on this grassland." She was already angling her horse upward, to the right where a low ridge ran parallel to the trail. The shelf follows the old creek line. When the west wind comes in, the dust funnels down the bed. "You'll be blind and choking in 2 minutes." He looked at the horizon. He looked at the ridge. He followed her. The shelf came through the creek bed 40 seconds later like a thing that had been waiting, brown and thick and fast, the kind of dust wall that takes the sense of direction with it. On the ridge above it, they felt the wind but could still see and breathe and navigate. She watched it pass below them without appearing particularly surprised. He said, "How did you know which way it would move?" She pointed at the grass on the hillside. "The grass is bent away from the creek bed on the west slope toward it on the east. It's been doing that all season. The wind pattern is regular." He looked at the grass. She was right. He had not noticed the grass. He said, "You weren't here for 6 hours on a stage." "I've been coming to this territory since I was 8, she said. "My father's ranch was 2 days east." "Was," he said. "He's dead," she said. "3 months ago." He said nothing. She said the accident that killed him was not an accident. He looked at her. She said, "Edmund Vale manufactured a debt against my father's ranch over the course of 4 years. When my father found out and tried to document it, there was a horse accident. Vale has evidence that connects him to it. I have evidence that connects him to the debt fraud." She looked ahead at the trail. "I'm taking mine to the county seat before he has the opportunity to make me a wife and subsequently make my access to my own legal inheritance significantly more complicated." He rode beside her for a moment. He said, "Vale hired me to take you to Vale Ranch." "Yes," she said. "You knew he'd hire a guide. I assumed he would. He doesn't like people getting lost or getting free." He thought about the contract, about the wording, about the fact that he had been hired by Vale's man, not by Vale, and had met the man once for 20 minutes, and that 20 minutes had not been enough to know what he was carrying a contract for. He thought about his father, about a piece of land that had been perfectly good until a man with paperwork had made it complicated. He said, "What's in the case?" She said, "Papers, survey documents and contracts, and a record of payments that don't appear in the official ledgers." He said, "How long have you been carrying that?" "Since before my father died," she said. "He prepared it. He gave it to me 3 days before the accident, which tells me he knew it was coming." He looked at the case strapped behind her saddle. He said, "All right, county seat first." They made camp as the light went. There was no stage stop and no ranch house on this section, which he'd known when she'd insisted on leaving the station immediately. She'd known too, he thought. She had known the timing. She made camp efficiently and without needing to be shown where things were, because she had been on trails before and knew that the first hour of camp is the organizing hour, and complaining about circumstances is not part of organizing. He built the fire and made coffee. She ate trail food from her own supply. She'd bought it at the stage stop while he'd been dealing with the horses. And she sat across the fire from him with the case between her feet and watched the dark prairie. He said, "What's Vale's claim on you specifically?" She said, "A betrothal agreement my father signed when he needed an emergency loan to survive the second bad season. Vale held the loan and the agreement for 4 years and made it due when my father died." He said, "An agreement you could contest." "I could contest it if I can get to the county seat before he can file the marriage documents and have me declared his legal dependent, at which point contesting becomes considerably more difficult." He thought about the county, about the distance to Vale Ranch, about the 3 days they had before whatever Vale had in motion came to a head. He said, "Do you know where the evidence against Vale came from?" "Some of it is my father's records. Some of it came from a boy who worked at Vale Ranch, Thomas, who told me before I left Ashford Ranch that he'd overheard conversations about my father and the accident." She looked at the fire. He was 14. He was frightened. I told him to go to his aunt's house and stay there. He said, "You had time to arrange a witness before you got on the stage." She looked at him. "I've been planning this for 2 months." He looked at her across the fire. A woman of 26 who had organized a legal case against one of the largest cattle barons in Colorado Territory, maintained it through her own grief, and dressed herself to look like a woman traveling to be married so that Vale's suspicion would stay sleeping until she was close enough to the county seat that it was too late to matter. He said, "Your father taught you how to read the grass and the wind and the way water moves under dry ground, and how to read a survey document and identify when the numbers don't add up." She picked up the coffee cup. He was thorough. He drank his coffee. He said, "My family lost a ranch when I was 20. Bad debt, bad paperwork, a man with enough money to make both problems stick." She looked at him. He said, "I've been on trails since then. Never settled," she said. "Not a question. Nothing to settle for," he said. The prairie was dark and wide around them, and the fire was small and the stars were clear, and he sat with that statement and felt it accurately, which was the kind of honesty that happens more readily around fires than it does in daylight. She said, "My father's ranch is at Ashford. When this is done, the land is mine. The water rights, the stock, the debt cleared." She was quiet for a moment. He always said a ranch is only as good as the people working it. He said nothing. She said, "I'll need people who know the Tomuyan." He said, "That's a different kind of offer than I came out here expecting to hear." She said, "I'm not offering anything yet. I'm saying what I know is true." He put his cup down. He said, "We should sleep. County seat is a hard day's ride from here." She said, "I know." She spread her bedroll. He spread his. Between them, the case full of her father's careful preparation for his own death. He lay and looked at the stars and thought about his father's land and a man with paperwork and the specific grinding injustice of watching something you built be taken by someone who had only ever arrived after. He thought about grass that bends consistent with the wind direction. He slept. They had been riding for 2 hours the next morning when they heard horses behind them, not stage horses. Ranch horses, fast, purposeful, the sound of an errand. 2 of Vale's men. Levi reined in. He turned. He looked at the 2 riders coming over the rise with the careful assessment he applied to men who might be carrying weapons and had been sent after something they thought belonged to their employer. Madeleine had already assessed them. She had pulled her horse up beside his. She said quietly, "They'll try to take the case." He said, "I know. Don't fight them over it." He looked at her. She said, "If you fight them, Vale can frame it as an assault on his employees. That gives him a legal entry I can't counter." She held his eyes. "Ride, let them follow. The county seat has a sheriff." He said, "It's 40 minutes. Then we have 40 minutes." She said. They rode. The 2 Vale men were faster horses, but hesitant riders, men who had been told to retrieve something and weren't entirely sure of their authority to do it forcibly. They followed closely, but didn't close the gap, which was the behavior of men waiting for an instruction that hadn't come. Levi watched them in his peripheral vision and rode and thought about his father's land and the man who had taken it, and about a woman beside him who had planned 2 months for this 40 minutes, and about the choice that had been in front of him since she'd said county seat first. He made it now explicitly. He had made it at the fire. The choosing was only the acknowledging. The county seat came over the last rise in the afternoon light, the courthouse, the main street, the sheriff's office with its sign visible from the road. The Vale men pulled up at the edge of town. They knew better than to enter in pursuit, which was what it would look like to anyone watching. Madeleine rode straight to the courthouse. Levi rode beside her. Thomas Reed was there. He had made it. The 14-year-old boy with his aunt's house and his knowledge of one overheard conversation, he was there, with the county clerk's statement ready because Madeleine had arranged for him to be. The county examiner was there. The evidence was presented. The betrothal agreement against the backdated debt documents and the survey discrepancies, and Thomas's statement and the payment ledger that showed 15 transactions that did not appear in Vale's official records. It took 4 hours. At the end of it, the examiner looked at Madeleine and said that the betrothal agreement was void on the grounds of fraudulent inducement, the debt against Ashford Ranch was under investigation, and the county sheriff had been alerted regarding the death of Charles Ashford. She thanked the examiner. She walked outside. Levi was at the horses. He had been there through all 4 hours. She said, "It's done." "It is," he said. She said, "You've been standing here since we arrived." "Horses needed water," he said. She looked at the horses. They had been watered an hour ago. She said, "Levy." He turned. She said, "You were hired by Vale's man to take me to Vale Ranch." "I was." "You didn't do that." "No." She was quiet for a moment. "Why?" He looked at the courthouse, at the building where 4 hours of careful work had just been deposited into the legal record. He said, "Because you were right about the grass." She looked at him. He said, "A person who can read the town wind correctly isn't wrong about what she's carrying." She was quiet for a long moment. She said, "The Ashford Ranch needs someone who knows this territory." He said, "I know this territory." She said, "It's not a trail job. It's a permanent position." He said, "I know what it is." The afternoon light on the county seat was the particular gold of late Colorado autumn, and behind them the courthouse held its new record, and ahead of them was the bent grass road and 2 days east to Ashford Ranch. She handed him the map she'd been keeping in her case. "You know the route better than this," she said. He looked at it. He folded it and put it in his coat pocket. They rode, not with her behind him, side by side, which was the correct way for two people who know the same road to cover it, and they covered it in the autumn light, with the Tauhung wind open around them, and the grass bending in the consistent pattern that tells you which way the wind is going to go. On the Colorado town wind there are things that look like submission that are actually preparation. A woman dressed for a wedding who is carrying a legal case. A man hired to deliver her somewhere she doesn't intend to go. The time between the stage stop and the courthouse, when all the ground covered was ground that mattered. No one can own the town wind, not really. You can map it and fence it and calculate the water rights and deed the surface to someone's name, but the grass remembers its own patterns, and the wind goes where it decides, and the dust shelves form over the old creek lines, regardless of who has paper on the land above. The people who understand this are the ones who survive it. And on the road east from the county seat in the autumn of 1889, two people who had read the same signs differently for the first half of their journey were reading them now from the same angle, which is the condition under which things get built that are worth building. Thank you for watching. This channel is no longer supported by ads, and these stories continue because people believe they matter. Patreon is a quiet way to support the work with early access, story previews, and small moments of input before each tale is fully told. On screen now is a preview of the Patreon page. If you'd like to support the channel, the invitation is in the first pinned comment down below. I'll see you in the next story.